So I am sat here with Dom Knight, who I know as a musician, but I've also come to know the project Men Against Patriarchy, which I think is a fascinating project. You do meetings around educating people of all genders and backgrounds around the patriarchy and what's going on in the world, in the UK and beyond as well. Can you tell me a little bit about, because I read the manifesto in terms of my research for this. Can you tell me a little bit about why this project started? Because it's been going for a few years, hasn't it? You've been doing it for a few years. I think I remember reading something back from 2014, was it?
I no.
Okay. I thought there was a blog. I think
No,
it was Men Against
I think that's.
Patriarchy
I think
Bristol.
yeah. So that's an entirely different thing.
Okay.
So that was. I actually know some of those people. I think that was started a long time ago. It sort of did a little bit of time and then fizzled out.
Okay.
People started having babies, moving away. I think, yeah. So that sort of group's kind of separate to our one. So there's a bit of confusion there with the name and that. But
Okay. Well, we can clear that up in this. That's great.
so yeah, we're the new version, completely
Okay.
separate to that. Slightly different setup, I think. Yeah, we've been running just over a year, so I think our year anniversary was October, November.
Mm,
We're not very good at birthdays, so we didn't make a note of it. But yeah, just over a year we've been running it now.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I read the manifesto that you put on the like I said, there is a newer website. I knew the one back in the day that I researched from 2014 hadn't been updated in a while. So there is a new one, menagainstpatriarchy.co.uk, which you have on your Instagram. And if you go there, there is a manifesto, and you talk about again educating and informing, and again sort of providing space for conversation, emotional support, and discussion. Now that's a lovely idea, and I've seen there's been Instagram chats and things like that, and obviously you have had meetings. What are the practicalities of building a project like this? How has it been going from that birthday or not birthday, going from that start in last year, to getting it to where it is now, where you actually have an audience and people that are actively engaging with you and talking about these issues?
I think the initial sort of and I suppose in a way still the issue is just getting people to engage. It's quite difficult getting men to turn up, because it requires a degree of looking at your own sort of fallibility, your own accountability within living under a patriarchal society. And because we come from a feminist, intersectional feminist sort of viewpoint, I think that puts or can put people off.
Mm-hmm.
So our initial challenge from the beginning was sort of getting people to come and then staying. But since we sort of started, we've had about 20 or so members, and people dip in and out. Life is complicated, it's difficult, people are busy, there's work, families, all that sort of stuff. So we have like a sort of core of about 8 to 10 people that come regularly, and then a few others that dip in and out over the sort of months and that. But that's all been based on word of mouth. We've not really advertised too much. Like we have the Instagram, I think we have a Twitter, which we're debating whether or not to close down because of various reasons.
Yeah.
But we've not really advertised the group as such. So it's sort of been word of mouth and people bringing their friends and stuff. And it's been a really nice process. We've got to know a whole array of people, and formed a little community, which is nice. But I think we're now now we've passed the year mark, we're starting to think more about applying for funding, running more groups, getting a wider reach, and possibly even starting groups around the country as well. So sort of like going to different cities, taking a sort of blueprint of how we run the group, and if someone wants to start their own one and run it, for themselves, provide the sort of support for that as well. So yeah, we're definitely looking at expanding and
Yeah,
seeing where it goes.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's an exciting time. I would ask, what are the major challenges again of, obviously I suppose it's a similar line, but I'll try and explain why I'm asking the question. I brought this to a couple of people's attention, and they're like, "Oh, that's really cool." But also another word that comes up is brave. People are sort of saying, "Well, people in modern society, they're like, oh, well, I don't need to look at this. I feel like I perfectly understand myself, or I understand women." You know, and I wonder, what are the major challenges of? You mentioned obviously having, getting men to come in the first place, but have you had any people question why you're doing it and things like that? Because and again, it was interesting to me that that word brave came up, because people said, well, actually calling this stuff out, having these meetings, it's quite a brave thing to do, because some people might take it the wrong way. People might think, oh, well, it's about, I guess it's about you doing your research, which I can see, and people that go on the website can see you've done. But I guess there is a challenge there in getting people involved and getting people to understand why you're doing it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's something that we question ourselves quite often.
Mm-hmm.
Like whether or not we are doing the right thing in the right way, and we're constantly learning ourselves. It's not like we've done the research and then we've sort of like we've attained a level. It's continual, and part of our manifesto is sort of just acknowledging the fact that we are going to continuously get it wrong. We can't speak on behalf of all men. We can't speak on behalf of women in general, but we have an idea from sort of the research that we do and the conversations that we have, of what we're trying to achieve, I suppose. I think there has been, I think mostly from sort of partners or friends of members, there's been a few sort of points of like questioning what it is, and I think part of that is to do with the fact that it's like a male only space.
Right.
And we're very conscious of this. We don't want to create a vacuum for ourselves where we're sort of doing the work and then patting each other on the back and going, "Look, we're good men." We're sort of like, we're feminists, we're fighting the patriarchy, and then just sort of get stuck in a little self-congratulatory loop. So we're constantly checking in with ourselves and occasionally other people, other women that run groups that we know, just to make sure that we're on the right path. And I think that's a really important part of any activist work, is to sort of like check in with yourself as to why you're doing it and what you're hoping to achieve, and whether or not it's having a positive influence. And it's interesting because when I say I run a men's group, I feel a bit physically sick myself. Like, I don't like the idea of men's groups. I find them, there's a whole host of reasons, and we discuss this quite often in group. Almost everyone that comes finds a room full of men really intimidating. And I think that's a big challenge for getting people to come. It is a room full of men, and we are all sort of sat there discussing stuff, and it's interesting how, as men, we find it uncomfortable being around other men. So I can fully understand why, from the outside perspective, if you don't really understand what we're trying to achieve, a room full of men talking about feminism could quite easily be a negative. So you have men's rights groups all over the world that sort of like deal with men's mental health and are essentially just discussing a series of misogynistic topics, but disguised in other ways. So yeah, we're very conscious of that. And yeah, it's just constant learning and constant sort of like checking in, I suppose.
Yeah,
making sure that we're not falling down the wrong rabbit hole.
Yeah, being accountable. Yeah, and as much as you can, Dom, if you can sort of tell me about what brought you to this sort of, what brought you to this dance, so to speak. Like, what experiences in your life, as much as you're willing to go into, led you to set up this group, and what experiences have you had that equip you to to run a group like this and make you so interested and passionate, about this project, really?
I think I'd say it's something that I've been interested in for as long as I can remember,
Mm-hmm.
but not necessarily knowing it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's been a lot of experiences in my childhood that sort of like led me to this point. And I've just said a lot of stupid shit in my time. And I fully understand where it comes from. Like, all the women in my family have had pretty bad experiences from men, and their expression of that was very sort of like vocal when I was growing up. So I sort of took on board a lot of like self-hatred for being a man, and never really understood why. Like, I didn't really understand my part in that, because one, I was sort of too young to really have done anything at that point. And two, just didn't really get it. And then I think that in turn, as I became a teenager, made me rail against it. So I was like, I wouldn't say I was an anti-feminist, but I was definitely like questioning of certain things. I've definitely said not all men, not really understanding what that meant. But it was just like out of frustration and a lack of understanding and a lack of education. I couldn't find any information to sort of appease my questioning. And I think if the internet was more of a thing, I could have easily gone down some sort of like weird men's rights rabbit hole. And I've definitely looked at some weird shit and realized it was kind of wrong. But I think the biggest thing for me is having female friends that would sort of call me out and tell me that I was like, what I was saying wasn't okay. In a kind, loving way. Allowing me to say my stupid shit, call me out in a nice way, and then leave me to think about it. So I'd sort of like, I'd say some ridiculous statement, be told why it was wrong, and then I'd go away and think about it, and then I'd come back and say another ridiculous statement, and it became this sort of thing where like I just started doing my own learning. And essentially just sort of like had to unlearn a lot of the stuff that I thought I knew. And yes, just through my own experience of growing up, of being a man, of existing in the world, of not feeling comfortable around men, of not feeling comfortable with myself, and not feeling comfortable with gender either. That's something that I've sort of come across recently, is realizing that like I've never felt comfortable identifying fully as male. So I've always been quite, we were raised very fluid, I suppose. We all wore dresses, we all wore makeup as and when we wanted to. And I think it's sort of like, as soon as you start realizing that the patriarchal side of masculinity is the thing that causes so much pain in growth and in your teenage years and in your adult years, all the problems that you have in relationships, all your problems that you have with friends in workplaces, you suddenly start realizing it's all tied together, and it's this umbrella of oppression that women face on a daily basis, but also men as well. It's been a long journey of, I suppose, I don't really like the term self-discovery, but self-learning. Getting things wrong, trying again, knowing in my heart of hearts that the way that I have been in the world hasn't been the best, and trying to do better, I suppose. And Ollie, who I run it with as well, I think would echo that. He can't be here today because he's working, but yeah, I think that's a fairly common reason why most men come and do the work with us. The experiences of most men seem to be incredibly similar.
So there is a desire to educate people to educate themselves, and that's the kind of person that will come to you, is someone who wants to educate themselves, wants to learn. Maybe they think they know something, but they come to you and it's about kind of learning that there's always more you can learn, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's I wouldn't we sort of frame it as a non-hierarchical safe space for men to discuss issues around patriarchy and feminism. So we continuously learn from the people in the group. It's reciprocal. We are not there as sort of like educators as such. We have a fairly strong grasp of sort of the academic side of feminism, but no would we call ourselves experts in the field or anything like that. It's just we have a desire to learn and a realization that it's kind of necessary for us to continuously do the work and help other people do that. So that safe space that I was given to make mistakes, that's sort of what we want to create. People to discuss the difficult things that they don't understand. They wouldn't feel comfortable just kind of like having a chat in the pub sort of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, before we sort of, like I said, I've got a few more questions, and I think, the first thing is you mentioned the research that you do to prep for group and to obviously better understand yourselves. What would you say, to anybody listening to this, watching this, or anybody that sees your website, Instagram, and platforms? What are the best resources that someone, men, women, LGBTQ plus, anybody from any background, if they're interested in the work you're doing, what kind of research? Not do they need, because that's the wrong word, but what kind of work and what kind of research would you suggest or advise that somebody does if they're interested in your work and better understanding what it is you're doing?
I suppose the most crucial thing is to be inquisitive, to have that desire to sort of look further than the base of what we're sort of given from a state education point of view, I suppose. And I suppose it depends on how you learn. I think it's really important to recognize learning styles in anything, really. I'm not a very academic learner, so for me this work is quite hard. But I do a lot of reading. Like I'd say the majority of my reading is sort of feminist literature, not like in a non-fiction sense, which for some people might not be massively attainable. But there's workshops out there, there's online spaces, and for me it's a lot of reading. And I think I'd recommend starting with bell hooks being one of the I'd say most interesting and accessible feminist writers, from an intersectional standpoint as well. And the book that we started with our group, Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates, that's a really, really depressing but really easy to read book, which I think is a good gateway to just understanding privilege, patriarchy, the role that men play in the society that we live in. There's a lot of resources out there, and I think it just requires you to be inquisitive and want to know and want to have the will to change.
That's again, it's a great message there. And so I guess the next step is, if somebody wants to get involved in what you're doing, you mentioned obviously there is a desire to take this nationally now. Obviously, how does somebody get involved? What are the ways that people can, at least in the first instance, come on board if they're interested? If they see this, listen to it, and are interested in the work you do, how does somebody get involved in the first instance?
So we're based in Bristol. I suppose if you want to get involved in the face-to-face group, you sort of have to be in the vicinity. But we do have a lot of sort of plans for the new year. One of those is to possibly start doing online sessions, just for people. I've had a lot of interest around the country, which we can't fulfill at the moment, for a variety of reasons. But we've had someone show interest in coming to our group from Exeter, who was going to drive a good hour and a half to get to the group, sort of thing. So if you're willing and you can drive, get down to Bristol. But yeah, we have a website which we don't really update very often because we're a bit slow. But the Instagram and the Twitter are sort of used fairly regularly, so we sort of do little informative slides. And I suppose if you want to know more and you want to get involved in any way, just messaging us, starting a conversation. We're very, very open to Zoom calls or phone calls or text chats or whatever. We have a few of those every now and then, so just reach out if you want to get involved. I don't really know of anything like this going on around the country. I'm sure it's out there. I hope it's out there, but maybe look into seeing what's around, I suppose. Start your own group if you really need to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, take that initiative there. And this is the last question. Is testing whether I've done my job properly here. Is there anything that you feel like I might have missed? Anything you'd like to promote? Anything you'd like to say to anybody who is again checking the project out, checking out your work?
I think I suppose in a summary, it's just for us, it's quite crucial that we as men are continually checking our privilege and our place in society. And having come from the journey that I have, being younger and feeling out of place, feeling constantly attacked by feminism and women, realizing that feminism isn't anti-male. It's really important that we understand that the idea of equality is not to sort of like take away the power from men and give it to women. It's to find that balance of equality. And patriarchy is a controlling, dominant force that is incredibly oppressive to young boys and men. And that's where I think for us the crucial point of education is starting quite young, so that we're not sort of socializing ourselves to like heteronormative gender roles where it causes us pain. We are fully capable of having a deep emotional connection with ourselves and with other people. And so much of the violence towards women, emotionally, socially, and physically, is male repression and not being able to address our own feelings, which unfortunately is released in anger and often violence. So I think just it's important to realize that it's not an attack on masculinity as such. It's just an attack on, well, it's not even an attack. It's trying to unlearn and dismantle patriarchal masculinity.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, again, just be inquisitive and open.
Yeah. Again, open to new discussions, and again, people can check out Men Against Patriarchy website, Instagram, and obviously do message if you are interested in the work. Dom, thank you so much for making the time for me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.